Okay. So, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to discuss a variant, a subspecies of crime known as financial crime. Now, financial crime is a white-collar crime. White-collar crime is very distinct from street crime. The psychology is completely different. Even the demographics are different. In the countries of the West, white-collar crime is committed by middle-aged white males who are also very well off, whereas street crime is committed mostly by people who are not white, not well off, and young. So the demographic profile, the psychological profile are completely different. And it raises the question, why would anyone commit a white-collar crime? Why would anyone commit a financial crime if they are well off? If they're in the middle of their lives, if they have a family, they have a home, they have a settled pattern and routines, why would they risk disrupting all this, not to mention spending the rest of their lives in a prison, if there are no serious psychological problems involved? And gradually, we are coming to believe in criminology that white-collar crime, not all of it, but a lot of it, is motivated by severe, deep-set, lifelong psychopathologies. And that is the topic of today's lecture. There are three types of financial crime. There's money laundering, there is fraud, and there is corruption. Now, as far as we could ascertain, money laundering does not involve any mental health problems. Money laundering is not the outcome of any compulsions or any personality disorders or any other issue in mental health. Money laundering is antisocial in the sense that money laundering involves breaking the law. And it does take a specific type of personality to break the law on a regular basis. A personality which is antisocial, or a personality which is high on what the International Classification of Diseases calls dissociality. But this is not full-fledged mental illness. It's more like a personality style. It's more like a habit. It depends where you've grown up, who you were surrounded with in childhood, modeling, which role models you've emulated as a child and as an adolescent. So I will put money laundering aside. Money laundering is also usually a very structured, organized activity, a little similar to tax evasion or tax havens of corporations. Today we're going to focus mostly on fraud, all types of fraud, individual fraud, securities fraud, checking fraud. There are dozens, hundreds of types of fraud. We're going to discuss the psychological template behind fraudulent activities, and we are going to discuss corruption, the psychology of corruption, which is a very interesting topic and much neglected in the literature. We're going to start with fraud. All of you have heard probably of Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff was the head of NASDAQ, which is one of the major stock exchanges in the United States and in the world, actually. He was the head of the Securities Association. He was a pillar of the community. He was a very prominent figure in the securities industry. And the last thing anything would have imagined is that Bernie Madoff would be involved in fraud. And yet, for decades, Bernie Madoff sustained a Ponzi scheme, the largest in human history. Ponzi scheme at its apex reached the value of $50 billion, like the economy of a middle-sized country. And the participants in the Ponzi scheme were the elites, top politicians, rock stars, movie stars. I mean, everyone who is anything, business, the largest businessman, biggest businessman, they all participated in his Ponzi scheme until it collapsed He was exposed. He was taken to prison. All his property were confiscated. His wife suffered. His children suffered. It was a horror. The whole family was destroyed. He paid an exceedingly heavy price for his actions. And yet, to the very day that he died in prison, he never ever expressed remorse, regret, doubted his actions, asked himself whether what he has done was somehow wrong. Bernie Madoff, to the last day of his life, remained unrepentant. And that is a very crucial feature, recurrent feature in white-collar crime. People who commit white-collar crimes are unrepentant. And they are unrepentant for a variety of reasons, which we're going to discuss momentarily. Let's start with the fact that we have studied white-collar criminals, especially criminals involved in financial fraud, insurance fraud, other types of fraud. We have studied them very, very deeply and very intimately for many decades. We have a firm grasp on their psychology. We can even predict who is likely to commit financial fraud and financial crime. And so the first thing we discovered is that all of them shared a sense of impunity, a sense of immunity to the consequences of their actions, a counterfactual belief that they can always get away with it, that no one is going to catch up to them. There's a famous movie, Catch Me If You Can. This sense of immunity and impunity is, of course, a form of magical thinking. Magical thinking is the belief that your wishes, your dreams, your hopes, your fantasies, your thoughts, and your beliefs actually affect reality, shape reality. That you have the capacity, just by wanting something very much, just by believing something a lot, you have the capacity to somehow change the structure of reality and the processes involved in it. This is known as magical thinking. And all white-collar criminals share this magical thinking. They believe that they are somehow untouchable, invulnerable, impermeable, and that they're always going to get away with it and things are going to turn up for the better. When they don't, these people are shocked. They're not only shocked, they're indignant because the very narrative of their universe has been falsified. When they are arrested, when they are on trial, when they are sentenced to prison, and so on and so forth, they are in a state of denial and indignation. They are furious, they rage, they contest the process, they claim to have been subjected to injustice, and so on and so forth. Not necessarily because they're trying to manipulate the courts or public opinion, but because they truly believe it. They are truly no longer with us. These people live in a fantasy. We're going to discuss it a bit later. People who commit financial fraud are exactly like street criminals. They have a problem with impulse control. They are impulsive. Impulsivity actually is one of the main characteristics of what we call primary psychopathy. The inability to control one's urges, one's drives, one's impulses is a critical feature in what is known collectively as cluster B personality disorders, the dramatic, erratic personality disorders, especially narcissistic, borderline, and psychopathic personality disorders. These, according to studies by Robert Hare, by Nathan Babiak, by many others, these constitute a sizable portion of the prison population, these people with personality disorders. And so we are likely to find personality disorders among people who commit white-collar crime, among fraudsters, con artists, swindlers, grifters, scammers. Personality disorders are overrepresented. They are overprevalent among these people. White-collar crime, therefore, is a type of mental illness or the manifestation and expression of mental illness. It should not be taken lightly, and we should not always assume that the white-collar criminal is an evil, cunning, scheming, Moriarty. Sometimes it's a driven person, a person who is taken over by impulses that are uncontrollable and inexorably driven towards this kind of misbehavior and misconduct. Impulsivity is a critical feature, but it goes hand in hand with what is known in psychology as alloplastic defenses. Alloplastic defenses are the tendency to blame other people, to blame institutions, the world, reality, politics. Everyone is guilty. Everyone is to blame. Everyone is responsible except the culprit, except the criminal. This type of criminal never assumes responsibility for his or her actions. This kind of criminal denies any evil intent, any malicious intent, any criminal intent, mens rea. This kind of criminal, even when caught red-handed or with a hand in the till, would immediately spin some kind of story which is self-exonerating, self-justifying, some kind of story which renders the criminal all good and everyone else and everything else all bad. People made him do it. The environment misunderstood him. He was or she was discriminated against. This was just an attempt to right some wrong. It was all done for the greater good, and a million other narratives. All of them counterfactual, all of them unrealistic, all of them fantastic, all of them ungrounded. We're beginning to see that people who commit white-collar crimes are convinced not only of their own impunity, but of their own innocence. They regard themselves as victims of society, of institutions, of other people. They believe that other people envy them, undermine them, challenge them, that there is some malevolent or malicious conspiracy going on, and so on. In short, people who commit white-collar crime very often display what we call paranoid ideation. And so alloplastic defenses, coupled with sense of immunity and impunity, put the two together, and what you get is what is known in psychology as recklessness. Recklessness is the tendency to act without regard to the very probable and plausible consequences, adverse consequences of one's actions. The reckless person acts first and asks questions later. The reckless person is all focused on action focused, rather than deliberate, analytical. The reckless person has no horizon, no perception of the future, is embedded and grounded completely in the impulsive moment. And so recklessness is a key feature, key clinical feature of people who commit white-collar crimes. But whereas the street criminal is usually a one-time off criminal, it's a criminal who would snatch a bag, rape a woman, commit a murder. A street criminal would do something and then would usually repose, or there would be some break or hiatus in the activity. With white-collar criminals, there's a pattern of action that invades and imbues and permeates their entire lives. The totality of the life of the white-collar criminal is dedicated to white-collar crime. And so white-collar criminality is a lifestyle. It's not only the outcome of mental illness, but it becomes habituated. It becomes a mode of interaction which is pretty exclusive. The white-collar criminal defrauds people, embezzles, absconds with other people's money, evades taxes. The white-collar criminal manipulates securities, the publicly traded securities fraud. The white-collar criminal does things on a regular basis, every morning, every afternoon, and every evening, every day, of every month, of every year of his or her life. It is therefore the life of the white-collar criminal, whereas the street criminal can have long periods of time without any criminal activity. The white-collar criminal is always a criminal. I mentioned that the white-collar criminal is a bit detached from reality. We call this phenomenon impaired reality testing. A white-collar criminal is unable to evaluate and gauge reality appropriately. And that is a major reason why the white-collar criminal is oblivious, blissfully oblivious to the adverse consequences of his actions. He's not here. He's not grounded, the white-collar criminal. I'm saying he because majority of white-collar criminals are actually men. He is not grounded in reality. He inhabits some alternative universe, some virtual reality, what we call in psychology a paracosm. There is a fantasy involved. White-collar crime involves a lot of fantasizing, a lot of behavior which is almost pseudo-psychotic. The white-collar criminal is embedded in a dreamscape. It's like he's living in a dream and unable to break out of the dream. It's like lucid dreaming. And these fantastic elements, this unrealistic terrain, this dreamscape which the white-collar criminal inhabits allows the white-collar criminal to self-justify, to blame others, to believe that what he or she is doing as a higher purpose is actually even moral to some extent. I just want to make people happy. I just want to make others rich. I have a magic formula. I have come with an amazing invention. They lie to themselves. They're self-deceiving. They convince themselves that their own lies are true. And this is known as confabulation. All the elements that I mentioned constitutes a pattern known in psychology as narcissistic personality organization. We have found in studies that pathological narcissism and antisocial features, psychopathy, are overrepresented in and among white-collar criminals. And so the white-collar criminal confabulates, lies to himself and to others, self-deceives, and is embedded in a fantasy. And when you put all these elements together with impunity, with impulsivity, with entitlement, with a pronounced sense of envy, with competitiveness, with being driven and subject to urges, with ego-syntony, some kind of pride in what he or she is doing. When you put all these elements together, you end up with a person who is defiant, a person who defies social norms, conventions, mores, and ultimately a person who defies the law itself, a person who is a law unto himself, a person who refuses to succumb to authority and the dictates of authority. This kind of person is a contumacious person. And contumaciousness and defiance are major features of something called reactance, which is a clinical feature of psychopathy. I'm above the law. I'm above the law because I'm entitled. I'm above the law because I'm superior. I'm above the law because I'm immune to the consequences of my actions. There's impunity there. And I'm above the law because my fantasy should always be a substitute to reality. It's stronger than reality. It's more valid than reality. My fantasy is not a fantasy. It's a vision. My fantasy would make everybody's life better. And these are post facto justifications, of course. This is a form of reframing. Initially, when the white-collar criminal starts to commit crimes, he or she is motivated by banal attitudes and motivations. So greed, there's a lot of greed. There's a sense of superiority and a need to sustain a lifestyle which is exorbitant. Initially, white-collar crime starts with normality. Initially, white-collar crimes is merely an exaggeration of the habits, the wishes, the dreams, the fantasies, the hopes and expectations of a normal person. Everyone is greedy. Everyone wants to live rich. There's nothing unique about this. But the white-collar criminal takes it a step further because of this sense of entitlement. When I say entitlement, it has two facets. One facet is, I'm entitled to a good life. I'm entitled to special treatment. I'm unique. I'm amazing. I'm unprecedented. And by virtue of being so, no one should ever obstruct my ascendance and my supremacy. So that's one facet of entitlement. And the other facet of entitlement, if anyone says no to me, if anyone sets a boundary, if anyone hampers my activities, they are traitors, they are enemies, they are malicious, they are malevolent. It is entitlement that constitutes the pivot from normal pedestrian motivations to psychopathology and its attendant fantasy. So we have someone who starts to steal money because they have a lifestyle they want to sustain, or because they're greedy, and then they feel immune, they feel they're untouchable, invincible, they become grandiose, they have a sense of entitlement. I'm entitled to this money that I'm stealing. And then the entitlement drives the individual into a psychopathological state, into a mental illness, which involves, as I mentioned, all the aforementioned features, including, not the least, a fantasy defense, a narrative which is completely divorced from reality. It is easy to sustain the fantasy. It is easy to lie to yourself that what you're doing is not what you're doing. It is easy to convince yourself that society's judgment on your activities is completely wrong. You're misunderstood, you're discriminated against, you're being victimized. It's easy to convince yourself of this because whereas street crime involves human bodies, human faces, human smells, and humans generally, when you are committing a street crime, you come across physical objects, you come across human beings. Street crime is a hands-on crime. Even if you burgle an empty apartment, it is an apartment, it is an object. When you enter the apartment, you witness the lives of the occupants. There's always a connection. Of course, when you mug someone, when you rape someone, when you murder someone, street crime involves people. Whereas white-collar crime does not involve people. It involves symbols. White-collar crime is a manipulation of symbols. Symbols on a computer, usually, not even physical symbols. And sometimes cash. But even the cash, these are symbols. These are pieces of paper. There's no human there. There's no human face to the crime. And so it's easy to convince yourself as a white-collar criminal that you are not hurting people, that people are not involved. You're manipulating numbers on a computer. You're getting a suitcase full of pieces of paper. There are no people there. And of course, it's a self-deception. People do get hurt a lot by white-collar crime. Actually, more people get hurt by white-collar crime than street crime. But there is a lack of empathy there. Narcissists and psychopaths lack empathy. White-collar criminals generally lack empathy. They're unable to put themselves in other people's shoes. They're unable to visualize other people, their existence, their needs, priorities, dreams, hopes, wishes, their assets. So they have aphantasia, empathic aphantasia. They're unable to perceive other people as real, as external, as separate with a life of their own. This lack of empathy And the fact that white-collar crime has to do with symbol manipulation this combination allows the white-collar criminal to create narratives of unreality, to embed himself or herself in a kind of movie, a kind of virtual reality. Everything becomes abstract. Everything becomes a kind of video game or board game like Monopoly. The white-collar criminal does not anticipate real-life consequences because the white-collar crime does not take place in real life. It takes place in a fantastic space, in some symbolic space, in very detached from people. The white-collar criminal very, very rarely has to see the consequences of his or her actions. Very rarely does the white-collar criminal come across the victim of his or her misdeeds and misconduct. The white-collar criminal is divorced from his victims, is removed from his victims. The white-collar criminal is isolated, firewalled from his victims by using computer systems, by using the banking system. The white-collar criminal works with systems, not with people. So it's easy for the white-collar criminal to deceive himself. I'm doing no wrong. I'm hurting nobody. It's very common to hear a white-collar criminal say, oh, there's no victims here. They're going to get reimbursed by the insurance company. So I didn't do anything wrong. I hurt nobody. I may have stolen money from the bank. I may have stolen money from my company, embezzled. I may have even stolen money from an old widow, but they're all going to be compensated by the insurance companies. So I'm exempt. I'm innocent. I'm okay. And so alloplastic defenses are not only about convincing yourself that other people are to blame, that they are responsible for everything that's happened, that they're guilty. But alloplastic defenses are also about convincing yourself that whatever it is that you're doing would never have any adverse consequences on other people, not only on yourself, on other people as well. And a very typical sentence by a psychopath is, I stole their money because they were stupid. They should have paid attention. They should have been much more careful. Why did they leave their money exposed? Of course I stole it, but it's not my fault. It's their fault for having been so negligent. This is a form of alloplastic defense. And so the world of the white-collar criminal, the mind of the white-collar criminal, is very surrealistic. As I mentioned, it's kind of a dreamscape where the white-collar criminal wanders this dreamscape, navigates this dreamscape, this nightmarish alien planet, convincing himself that this is reality. And because these fantastic spaces are depopulated, there are no people there, it's easy for the white-collar criminal to believe that he's just playing a game, some kind of a game. It's a video game. And, why am I being arrested? What have I done except manipulate a few figures on a computer screen? I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't even use the money. The money is still there. So it's a game. There's a logic element here. There's an element of game playing, one-upmanship, competition. Competition against whom? Competition against the world. Competition against people who are richer. Competition against other white-collar criminals. And above all, competition against oneself. It's a desperate attempt to prove to yourself that you are not a loser, that the white-collar criminal possesses what we call an internalized bad object, a group or cluster of voices that inform the white-collar criminal that he is inadequate, he's a loser, and the white-collar criminal's activities are sometimes an attempt to falsify these internal voices, to prove to himself that he is a genius, that he is brilliant, that he is not a loser but a winner, that he is worthy, and so on. So it's an internal dialogue. The activities of the white-collar criminal are very often solipsistic. They are not social, they are not relational. It's a type of crime that is done in the darkness, alone, out of the sight of other people, type of crime that does not generate any grandiose rewards, any narcissistic supply, any attention. It seems that the white-collar criminal is playing chess with himself, trying to outbid himself, outdo himself, and win the game against himself. And that's why white-collar crimes, most of them, not all of them, are actually very lonely affairs. And even when they involve real life, flesh and blood victims, ultimately, the whole stratagem, the whole scheme is unknown to the victims. It's known only to the criminal. And so again, the criminal is alone. Even if there is a psychopath who is cheating old people out of their life savings, only he knows that. Only he is aware of that. The whole thing is unfolding and unfurling in his mind, and in his mind only. Con artistry, con men. The word con is short for confidence. Confidence men, confidence artist. The white-collar criminal exudes confidence, triggers confidence in people, acquires the trust of other people, creates, engenders, manufactures an alternative reality, a fantastic reality within which people can reside. And all this time, he holds the keys to the kingdom. He is the sole guardian and custodian of the truth. He is the only one who knows what's going on. And so it's a very solitary kind of crime, solitary kind of activity. You see, in street crime as distinct from white-collar crime, everything is above board. Everything is completely explicit. Everything is immediately decoded. Someone snatches your purse or your smartphone. It's very clear what's happening. A rape is very clear. A mugging is very clear. A murder is very clear. These are absolutely overt texts. Whereas white-collar crime is a covert text. It's a covert activity. It's a hidden text. It's an occult text. There are always layers of meaning. There's always a code which requires decoding. That's why white-collar crime investigations are by far the most complicated and very unsatisfactory because they usually don't come out with a full picture. Have a look, for example, at what's happening with Jeffrey Epstein. To this very day, years later, years after his death, we are still not quite sure what has happened there. And yes, Jeffrey Epstein's work, handiwork, was basically white-collar crime. So we are faced with narcissists and psychopaths. These are not mentally healthy people. Not all criminals are narcissists and psychopaths. Not all white-collar criminals are narcissists and psychopaths. Some white-collar criminals suffer from mood disorders. Others have anxiety disorders. Others have substance use disorders. But a substantial majority suffer from personality disorders. And among these, the majority are narcissists and psychopaths. So these people, their personality disorders, they're mentally ill. These are not just normal people, healthy people who woke up in the morning and said, I need to have another $100,000 because I want to buy a Lamborghini or a Ferrari. That's not a typical white-collar criminal. A white-collar criminal is driven is consumed by the white-collar crime. The white-collar crime becomes the life of the white-collar criminal. Bernie Madoff and his sons spend 90% of their waking hours running the Ponzi scheme from secret computers in back rooms. People who commit white-collar crimes become defined by the white-collar crime. The white-collar crime becomes the core identity of the white-collar criminal. And that's not the case with a street criminal. The street criminal may commit a crime, multiple crimes, have a long rap sheet, but you can't use the crimes to define the personality of the street criminal. You can use a white-collar crime to define the personality, life and lifestyle, and mind of the white-collar criminal. It's two very distinct types of crime. We know that psychopaths are goal-oriented. They're inexorable, they're ruthless, they're callous, they have no empathy, no access to positive emotions, they don't bond, they don't attach, they reject authority, they're contumacious, they're defiant, and they're reckless. That's a typical profile of a primary psychopath, the factor one psychopath, which are the psychopaths that are overrepresented in the prison population, and by the way, among chief executive officers of Fortune 500 companies. Tells you something about the corporate world and how white crime can actually be legitimized and become corporate greed. Anyhow, that's the profile of a psychopath. And the goal orientation of the psychopath renders the psychopathic white criminal different to the narcissistic white criminal. Whereas a narcissistic white criminal, the white criminal who is a narcissist, is mainly concerned with maintaining a fantasy, a narrative, the white-collar criminal who is a psychopath is mainly concerned with obtaining some goal. Money, sex, power, access, connections, you name it. There's some goal. And the psychopath pursues the goal by any and all means necessary. The psychopath deliberately and premeditatively lies, uses lies, gaslights, falsifies the reality perception of other people, manipulates, is very Machiavellian, and so on. So whereas both types of white-collar criminal are psychologically compromised, the psychopath is a lot more healthy, so to speak, a lot more mentally healthy than the narcissist. The narcissist is almost psychotic, almost insane. The psychopathic white-collar criminal is almost insane, has completely lost touch with reality, lives in a fantasy, in a narrative, like a character in a movie or in a video game. Whereas the psychopath is much more grounded in reality, still mentally ill because he cannot control his impulses, mentally ill because he's reckless and doesn't care about the consequences of his actions. He's self-defeating and self-destructive. There are many elements of mental illness or mental impairment or mental compromise in the psychopath. But when it comes to reality and the perception of reality, the psychopath is vastly superior to the narcissist because the psychopath always remains grounded in reality, can tell the difference between reality and fantasy, leverages fantasy and the lies of the fantasy to manipulate people, manipulates people with outcomes that are beneficial to himself. So the psychopath is self-efficacious. And so the psychopath is a far more dangerous white-collar criminal than the narcissist and far less likely to be captured, ultimately, to be discovered. When we talk about con artists, when we talk about swindlers and scammers, we are usually talking about psychopaths, not about narcissists. Someone like Bernie Madoff is a narcissist because Bernie Madoff created this fantasy in his mind that he's going to make many people rich and happy. And that was his main motivation, not the money. His main motivation was to be admired by people, to be respected by them, to be loved by them. He was looking for love. So that's a narcissist. But when we talk about other types of white-collar criminals who couldn't care less about people, white-collar criminals who, without a shred of empathy, or remorse, or regret, or compassion, or affection, or anything, white-collar criminals who are like some type of machinery, robots, alien intelligence, this type of white-collar criminals who take your last dime, even as you are dying, who abscond with the last savings of a widow or a widower, or white-collar criminals who blackmail without any hint of repentance and so on. These kind of white-collar criminals are much more dangerous, and they are typically psychopaths. But both psychopaths and narcissists, as white-collar criminals, they lead a parallel life. They lead a double life. On the surface, they're normal, they're healthy, they're functional, they're pillars of the community. They contribute, they're charitable, they're what we call pro-social, they're communal. And so it's very difficult to spot a white-collar criminal just by observing the person, just by casual observation and so on. You need to test. You need to subject the person to psychological testing, structured interviews, and observation, but structured observation. Only then you would be able to predict white-collar criminality. But if you just happen to be a neighbor, or even a friend, or a wife of a white-collar criminal, or a husband of a white-collar criminal, you would never know what's taking place. White-collar criminals maintain what Hervey Cleckley called the mask of sanity. They present to the world a mask, a persona, a facade of, I'm just an average guy, or I am what I seem to be, or whatever you think about me, you're right. In other words, they conform. White-collar criminals conform to stereotypes, to expectations, to roles, to models. They model some types of behavior. White-collar criminals are indistinguishable from you and me. And you never know what's going on under the surface, behind the scenes. There's always a parallel life, a double life. And the maintenance of this parallel life or double life is very, very energy consuming and energy depleting. Takes a lot of time and effort and mental resources to maintain one life, let alone two complete separate lives. Gradually, the white-collar crime or criminal activity tends to consume the other life. Gradually, the other life dwindles, deteriorates, degenerates. Gradually, the other life, the normal life, the healthy life, the communal life, the prosocial life, the life of family and friendships, and gradually this life disappears. And all that's left is the white crime life. But that's a very gradual process which takes years and even decades in the case, for example, of Bernie Madoff. And as the individual tries to maintain both lives simultaneously, as the individual juggles these balls in the air and tries to somehow sustain the precarious balance between the two types of life, the secret, hidden, occult, private life, and the public-facing life, this requires, as I said, a lot of mental resources, and then various mechanisms, psychological mechanisms, are activated, and sometimes they take over. The most dominant of which is known as dissociation. This kind of individual becomes gradually highly dissociative, develops memory gaps, lost time, becomes amnesiac, forgetful, and sometimes experiences depersonalization and derealization, feels that reality is not real and that he or she is not in reality. And all these together, these are known as dissociative symptoms. Dissociation is the only way to maintain a double life. When you're in one life, you need to dissociate the other. You need to forget the other. You need to cut it off, slice it off, delete it, bury it, repress it, ignore it, deny it. When you're in one life, the other life is dead to you. So the only way to accomplish this is dissociation. And dissociation is by far the most destructive psychological defense that we know of. It is so destructive that it gives rise to mental illness in a variety of contexts. For example, one of the diagnostic criteria of borderline personality disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual is dissociation. Dissociation is also very common in psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. So dissociation is bad for you. And dissociation becomes a key defense and a key clinical feature in white-collar crime, where the individual must sustain at all times, every single minute, a double life and not allow one life to intrude upon the other, not allow any interface, any contact, any connection between the two lives, because of the risk involved, but also because psychologically, the individual needs to feel that the white-collar crime life is somehow justified, somehow exonerated, somehow rendered exempt by the normal healthy life. I may be stealing money, but I'm contributing, I'm donating to charity. I may be absconding, I may be embezzling my bank, but at the same time, I'm a good father and a good husband. It's a kind of creating a balance of liabilities and assets, a financial statement or a personal statement. Basically, I'm a good person, maintaining the fiction of a good person, the self-concept of benevolence and charitableness, and pro-social, being pro-social. And so one major element in white-collar criminals is grandiosity. Gradually, as they continue to get away with whatever it is they're doing, some of them even convince themselves that they're protected by God. God himself is protecting them. It's a fact. They've been stealing money for years and decades. They've never been caught. There have been many, many brushes with the law, with audits, and nothing ever happened. Luck, fortune is smiling on them. And they feel even more entitled because it is the universe that is blessing their activities. And so they give in to grandiosity. Grandiosity is a cognitive distortion. Grandiosity is a misperception or a reinterpretation or a reframing of reality, input from reality, data from reality, stimuli from reality, in a way that would sustain and buttress and support an inflated, fantastic self-concept, self-perception, and self-image. The grandiose person believes himself to be endowed with some special gifts, to be blessed, to be unique, to be superior, and to a large extent, to be godlike. And so when he gets away with it, when he never gets caught, when he's successful, amasses all kinds of money and assets and so on, gradually the white-collar criminal begins to develop a sense of, I'm above it. I'm above society. I'm above the law. And I'm above the laws of nature. I'm above being caught. I will never get caught because there's something about me that is magical. It's a form of magical thinking, again. Magical thinking is a primitive kind of defense. Magical thinking is very typical at age 2 years old. 2 years old are magical thinkers. And when it survives into adulthood, it's a prime signal of mental illness or a psychopathology of some kind. And it is common in all white-collar criminals. Because they don't believe they're doing anything wrong, or because they've convinced themselves that they're inculpable, they're innocent, they're even good, whatever it is, it's for the greater good somehow. They have no remorse. They don't have empathy, of course, I mentioned it, but they have no remorse. And they instrumentalize other people. They use other people to accomplish the goals of the white crime. To accomplish the white crime, they use other people. They manipulate other people. They deceive other people. They motivate other people. They induct other people into the fantastic story, into the movie, thereby causing them to collaborate and collude in the white crime. White criminals use other people not only as victims, but they use other people as accomplices. The crime itself is solitary. The crime itself is solipsistic. The people who are collaborating in the crime, who are colluding in the crime, very often don't realize it's a crime. Now, of course, there are exceptions where the accomplices fully realize what they're doing. But then we have two narcissists or two psychopaths working together. But in the majority, vast majority of cases, the people who worked hand in hand with a white-collar criminal, with a financial criminal, were not aware what they're doing, what they were doing. A prime example are the sons of Bernie Madoff. The sons of Bernie Madoff facilitated his crime, the biggest in history, $50 billion Ponzi scheme, pyramid scheme, $50 billion for 30 years, 3 decades. His sons fully participated in the scheme. They maintained the scheme on their computers. And yet, to the very last second, they had no idea what they were doing. They were not aware that they're collaborating in the crime. And so they never went to prison. Only Bernie Madoff did. And that's a prime example of what I'm saying. So there is instrumentalization and Machiavellian leveraging of other people. As grandiosity increases, and the white-collar criminal believes himself to be God-sent, or God maybe, the white-collar criminal becomes even more narcissistic. White-collar crime tends to exacerbate narcissism and the cognitive distortions that are incumbent upon narcissism, such as grandiosity and entitlement. And so the white-collar criminal then finds himself in a kind of bind. On the one hand, the white-collar criminal becomes very proud of his exploits. He thinks that not only is he special, but the things he's doing are special. His actions are special. He thinks he deserves attention and recognition. He is proud of what he's doing. And so gradually, this kind of white-collar criminal begins to behave in ways which are very dangerous to himself or to herself, and that's when they get caught. They get caught because of attention seeking. They get caught because of overconfidence. They get caught because of grandiosity. They get caught because they think they're above it all and will never get caught. At that point, they get caught. They get caught because they do subliminally and unconsciously seek attention. They attract attention. They broadcast what they're doing. And they expect applause. And they expect adulation and admiration. And so the attention seeking takes them down. They take inordinate risks. They become addicted to thrills and excitement. They're aroused by whatever it is they're doing. And this is usually the final stage, the end game in the white-collar crime, and it brings their downfall. So this is fraud. You remember? I opened this lecture by telling you that financial crime has 3 types. There are 3 types of financial crime. Money laundering, which does not involve psychopathology. Fraud, which involves a lot of psychopathology, a lot of mental illness. And the last one is corruption. Corruption is endemic everywhere. Of course, the West would have you believe that corruption is an African feature, or an Asian feature, or a Latin American feature. Corruption is everywhere. In every single country in the world, corruption is an organizing principle. Corruption allows people to facilitate processes, to facilitate business. Corruption is like playing a video at speed, at a heightened speed, 2 speed, 3 speed, 4 speed. Corruption lubricates and speeds processes. That's why corruption is inevitable, and fighting corruption is pretty doomed. But we are not here for a political lecture. We are here to discuss the psychology or the psychopathology of corruption. And I'll tell you a personal story. In the 1980s, I transitioned from Nigeria, where I was advisor to the Ministry of Interior. I transitioned from Nigeria to Sierra Leone. In Sierra Leone at that time, there was a coup, and there was a guy called Momo. Momo was a general, and he became the president of Sierra Leone. And I went there and wanted to see whether I can do some business. In my previous reincarnation, I was a businessman, not a small one. And I went to Sierra Leone, and I met with President Momo. And President Momo took a liking to me or something. I was a kid. I was in my early 20s. And he invited me to his home, to his compound. It wasn't a home, it was a compound. And so one night, I went to his compound, escorted by dozens of soldiers. He was always surrounded by soldiers. And the presidency building looked like a barracks of some battalion or something. He was always surrounded by soldiers. So they took me to his compound. The compound was full of women and children, dozens of children, at least 4 women that I could count. And it was like, and at the very end, there was a shed. The shed was on a kind of artificial island. And Momo was waiting in the shed. And I entered the shed, and President Momo was surrounded by, at the very least, 600 video cassette recorders piled up in towers. There were towers of video cassette recorders, all of them untouched. They were unboxed. They were not in boxes, but they were untouched, clearly, because you couldn't touch them. They were piled up in towers. The irony was that in that period of time, there were constant power outages. There was no electricity, literally, like 90% of the time. So there was no way to use any of these video cassette recorders. He was just collecting them. He was hoarding video cassette recorders. Much later in life, when I transitioned from business to psychology, I'm also a physicist. Transitioned to psychology, I asked myself, what was happening in Momo's mind? What was happening in his mind? Why was he collecting video cassette recorders? Now, we should distinguish between 2 types of corruption. There is operational functional corruption. That's a kind of corruption that allows the corrupt politician to maintain networks of patronage and clientele, allows the corrupt politician to sustain his power, allows the corrupt kind of corruption that allows the corrupt politician to become rich up to a point, to send his children to Western universities and so on and so forth, to obtain healthcare in Switzerland. So this kind of corruption is totally understandable, totally human, and while deplorable on policy grounds, it's totally understandable and healthy and normal. There's no psychopathology involved. If you are stealing money from the state in order to pay off your minions and supporters, that's understandable, isn't it? If you are stealing money from the state to ensure the future of your family and to become rich, it's understandable. We may consider this to be obnoxious and objectionable, but it's understandable. It's human, it's normal, it's healthy. There's nothing there that is indicative of any mental illness. But how do you explain a Mobutu, a Marcos, a Saddam Hussein? How do you explain these politicians? They were hoarding, they were raking in billions of dollars, which they would have never used and never did use. All this money was outside in Western banks. It it was evident they did not need this money. They made no use of this money. It was clear that they were collecting money the way other people are collecting, I don't know, stamps or books or whatever. It was hoarding. They were hoarding money. It was not about the money. It was about the process of collecting money, securing the money, stealing the money. It was not about the money. The money was like monopoly money. It was inaccessible in many cases. And so, and then I asked myself, this type of corruption, which is extreme, is really sick. These are sick people. They're stealing money compulsively. It's a compulsion. They can't help it. Hoarding is a compulsive disorder. They're old people who collect newspapers. And so their apartments are full of newspapers to the ceiling. And there's no way to move around these newspapers. They have like hundreds of thousands of copies of newspapers. A Saddam Hussein or a Mobutu Sese Seko or, a Ferdinand Marcos, they were hoarding, but they were not hoarding newspapers. They were hoarding money. And hoarding is a compulsive disorder. It's a pathology. It requires treatment. But why were they hoarding money? I mean, many of them were hoarding other things. Ferdinand Marcos' wife was hoarding shoes. There are dictators and so on who are hoarding cars. They like to hoard cars. So there are many types of hoarding. But the most common white-collar crime, in terms of corruption, is stealing money from the state. So why do they do that? I mean, I understand if you steal $1 million. I understand if you steal $10 million. I even understand if you were to steal $100 million. Okay. But why do you steal $5 billion like Mobutu? What's in it for you? What are you going to do with this money? You're 70 years old. Whenever are you going to use it? And why is all of it outside of Zaire in Switzerland? So there's something sick here. There's some mental problem. And when I went deeper into the issue of the psychopathology of this type of corruption, I will call it compulsive corruption. When I went deep into it, it became clear that it is what is known as kleptomania. Kleptomania is when you steal things and you don't need these things. You steal all kinds of objects that you don't need. And you steal them because you're mentally ill, because there's a thrill to stealing them. You don't use them after that. And very often you throw them away, but you steal them. The act of stealing from a department store or the act of stealing is arousing. And this is how kleptomania is defined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. The pleasure, gratification, or relief when committing a theft. The individual may hoard or discard the stolen object. That sounds a lot like these compulsively corrupt politicians. And so it's clear that we are talking about some type of compulsive kleptomania. Compulsive kleptomania involves excitement and thrill. The more you accumulate money, the more excited you are. It arouses you looking at these towers of VCRs, towers of money, towers of cars. There's arousal impact, that you're aroused by it. It is exciting. It is thrilling. And at the same time, it's anxiolytic. It allows you to let off steam and it reduces anxiety. These people are highly anxious. They are anxious for good reasons. Many of them were subject to assassination attempts and so on. And one way to reduce anxiety is compulsion, hoarding. And so hoarding is anxiolytic, it is self-soothing. It's a little like eating disorder. When you overeat or undereat, hoarding is about reducing anxiety. It's self-medicating with a hoarded object. And so there is excitement and thrill. There is hoarding that is self-soothing and anxiolytic. There is compulsion. It also serves to enhance one's confidence and sense of self-esteem. I'm a multi-billionaire, so as a multi-billionaire, I'm all-powerful, I'm untouchable, and it is on a much deeper level a way to regulate one's sense of self-worth. These people are exposed to a lot of criticism, including internal criticism in their own minds. Why? Because they're misbehaving, because they're not okay, because they're breaking the law, because their behavior is not normative, because the societies frown upon them. They know it. These dictators, these tyrants, these corrupt politicians, they know what they're doing is wrong. And they internalize these voices. And in order to regulate their sense of self-worth and to silence these harshly critical voices, they steal the hoarded money, the assets in Switzerland, the buildings in London. All these are toys, kind of toys intended to somehow inform the corrupt individual. You see, you have all these things, you deserve them. You have all these things means you're superior. You have all these things means you're clever. You have all these things means your sense of self-worth should be pretty high. You should adulate and admire yourself for having attained and accomplished all these things. On a much deeper level, and I'm kidding you not, studies in psychology have demonstrated that money is a love substitute. When we get a gift, when we make money, we feel that we are being loved. The universe loves us. God loves us. Someone gives us money, they love us. Money is perceived as the vehicle and the conduit of love. Money is a love substitute. When you steal money and you hoard it, this is an act of self-love. It's like you are saying to yourself, I deserve this money because I'm lovable. I deserve this money because I'm special. I deserve this money. I have to prove to myself that I am loved. And to take this money is to show to myself that I'm loved. It's a love substitute. The early Protestants, especially the Puritans in the 17th century, they believed that if you're rich, that is proof that God loves you. I'm serious. You can find it in the religious texts, that being rich is the proof positive that you've been chosen and touched by God, that God's blessings and God's bliss are bestowed upon you. So in their worldview, the richer you got, the closer to God you were. The richer you got, the more saintly you were. They equated money with the love of God. They equated money with righteousness. And this frame of mind, this mindset, still pervades and permeates capitalism. And we all live in a capitalistic world. And the corrupt politician who cannot stop stealing money, who has to continue to steal money, even though he has already $3 billion secreted somewhere. This corrupt politician is actually engaging in a Protestant Puritan game, regardless of his or her religion. The Protestant Puritan game of the more money I have, the more assets I have, the more blessed I am by God and by society, and the more proof it is of my uniqueness and superiority. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'm available. And if not, it is a Saturday, a weekend, and I wish all of you a compulsion-free weekend. Any questions? So, I guess not. So, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, and see you next time.
Thank you very much, Prof. Appreciate you.
Prof, we appreciate you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank
We
you.
appreciate you, sir. But if I can really understand very
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a nice weekend there.
well, this is right.
Thank you. But
Thank
not
you.
in Syria alone.
I'm sorry, did I misunderstand? Do you have any question?
No, I said, well, you said you see me next time. I said, well, not in Syria alone or one of those funny countries you've been to. Thank you.
Thank
Just
you.
a joke.
Thank you. Have a nice day there.